Hello, friends. Today's guest on the podcast is Chad Andrews. Chad represents your everyman climber. He is also the man behind the Clipping Chains blog, where he interviews top climbers who balance careers with high-level climbing. Some of the guests he's had on his blog include Mike Doyle, which is how Chad and I connected, Jonathan Siegrist, Paige Klassen, Tara Kersner, Steve Bechtel, Dave McLeod, and many others. Chad also writes articles about personal finance and shares insights and lessons he's learned along his path towards financial independence. One of the things that really impressed me about Chad when we started talking is that he is his own success story. He and his wife have managed to reach financial independence in their mid-30s. He effectively retired at age 35, and they no longer have to rely on a paycheck. And it seems like they got to that point without sacrificing all that much. They were able to enjoy life, and he was able to continue climbing during that process, which I found super intriguing. We talked about the financial independence movement and how Chad first became interested in it. We talked about tracking your spending and how effective that simple habit can be at reducing your cost of living. We talked about setting aside 3 to 6 months of living costs and how that can create freedom to improve your work situation or even allow you to leave a job you hate. And we talked about the big 3 expenses that make up the majority of our living costs and a few simple things we can all do that can make a huge difference. And it's not skipping your morning latte or never doing anything fun again. I really appreciate Chad. He has a really pragmatic approach, and I think a lot of his insights could be really helpful for you guys. He also broke down some of the common misconceptions about the financial independence movement, and it's important to note that the stuff we talked about is not just for people with a high income or people who want to go all in. We all deal with money every day, and I wanted to make sure that people in any financial situation could take something away from this. I think some of the insights around reducing our living expenses could be really helpful for people struggling to find work right now, or those who are in a tight financial situation during this COVID pandemic. I linked to a bunch of resources for you guys in the show notes. As I mentioned during the episode, you can find those at thenuggetclimbing.com under Chad's episode page. And be sure to check out Chad's blog at clippingchains.com. And I'll be sure to link to some of my favorite articles of his as well. Hope you guys like this one, and I hope it helps. Please enjoy this fun and informative conversation with Chad Andrews.
Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
All right, Chad, we're rolling.
Yeah, cool.
Hi, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me. And like I was saying, when we talked the other day on the phone, in terms of like climbers, you've had some absolute legends on the show, and I don't deserve to be in the same room with them at all. But so I appreciate you having me. I really do. This is awesome.
My pleasure. Well, I'm not just having I'm not just having you on just because I'm doing a favor or anything. I was really impressed talking to you, and I think you have a lot of really great insights that were helpful for me, and I think they'll be helpful for a lot of people. So I'm excited to talk to you about it.
I appreciate that.
I thought we should probably start right off the bat with background into your story, your financial independence, retiring early and all that sort of stuff. But maybe before we go down that rabbit hole and I just let you tell your story, I was poking around on your website and I was reading about your dog. So you're married, you have a wife, and it's you and your wife and your dog. And on your website, you describe your dog as a sweet black lab street mutt who sounds like she is notorious for stealing food, for stealthy food thieving skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is your dog's name Snickers?
Not really. That's the name I give her on the website.
Okay.
I'm weird with her identity or whatever. But yeah, so it's not a real name.
You're protecting your dog's identity too.
I know. Isn't it weird? I'm more worried about her identity. I don't know. It's weird being on the internet. So
the internet is a scary place. I understand.
And when you don't have children, your pets are like your children. So it's strange. So, so she is incredibly food driven, probably the most food driven dog I've ever come across. And I have all these really embarrassing stories of me walking the dog down the neighborhood, walking by nice looking mothers pushing around their babies, and she's got like a pigeon in her mouth.
Oh my gosh.
Just like absolute gutter garbage come out of the, and like she just picks up anything. Like if it's like a piece of tinfoil with like a drop of ketchup, she's got it in her mouth, just salivating, walking down the road. And
oh my gosh.
there's like jaws of steel. So there's like no way you're getting it out. And yeah, I mean, anyone that's ever watched her knows. Like, I always warn anyone, like, you're going to get burnt. Just be ready for it. She's super sneaky.
That is funny.
Yeah, she's stealthy. But she's a great dog. She's a lab mix. We got her in Houston, Texas, off the streets. And
oh, that explains that, huh?
yeah, exactly. So she's already a lab, which
She's
is
a
a very
survivor.
food-driven dog. Yeah, exactly. And that's what the vet told us. They're like, labs are food-driven, but yours is probably going to be extra special because she was 3 months. Like she learned how to live by eating garbage. So it's just, and so to this day, she's a great dog. Other than that, like all my friends who I climb with, they all know, we keep her tied up, but they watch their packs and I watch my pack, and that's life.
That's funny. Has she gotten pickier over the years at all? Have you noticed that she has any favorite foods that she goes after, or is it just anything?
Nope. No, it doesn't matter. Well, we went to the park the other night and we had a big scare because all of a sudden she got home. She didn't have motor control. She was like pissing on herself, and it's getting warm here. And we thought maybe there had been some tall grass. I kind of let her off leash when nobody was around, let her run around. I thought maybe she got bit by a snake. And so I was freaking out. We called the emergency vet because it was after hours. And they're immediately like, oh, that was marijuana. And I'm like, marijuana? Like, I'm sorry, but I was a little taken aback. I'm like, we don't smoke marijuana, and I mean, not anymore. And and then she's like, no, it's Colorado, so you know how it is. Like, she could have picked up some ashes on the ground, and eaten them. And sure enough, I googled the symptoms, and she had every exact symptom, and it took her like a couple of days to get over it.
Oh, that's incredible.
I think she just like got some weed off the ground.
Huh.
So she'll eat anything. Yeah.
Did she have the munchies after that? Did she go on a total bender?
Well, it's hard to say because she always does. But no, for a couple of days she was really reluctant to eat, and she kind of she threw up. It was pretty bad. Like dogs aren't into it like we are. So yeah, you got to be careful with them.
Gotcha. Good to know. All right. Well, I will certainly have given an introduction to you in the intro, so people will have some idea of your background and kind of what you're bringing to the table. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'll just kind of give you the reins. I'd love to hear your story and kind of how you transitioned into this newfound interest into financial independence and retiring early and all that.
Yeah. I guess I like to think I represent like, the average climber in the sense that we look at a lot of magazines and we see a lot of cool stories and people who, seem to just climb nonstop and travel nonstop, like the pros and things like that, and maybe even yourself, which is very, and we all like lust for that. But I think the majority of us still go to work Monday through Friday, climb on the weekends, take our 2 to whatever many weeks of vacation and try to make the best of it. And that was me, just like so many others for many years. I actually started my career in Houston, Texas in 2010, and I started climbing the exact same month, the same week.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd come from grad school in northern Arizona, and I loved it there. And it was like there was a big climbing scene, but I was not into it at all. And this was coming out of the last recession, actually, which is interesting timing now that we're undoubtedly in another one now. So this was kind of out of the ashes of the last recession. And I took a job I didn't really want to do. I ended up, I'm a geologist by training, and I ended up in the oil and gas industry, which I never in a million years thought I would do. I wanted to go the academic track and be a professor and do all this stuff. And it was just like so much uncertainty at the time. I was like, I'll do this for like 3 years or something and then go back to school, hopefully. I got down there and started climbing at the same time because I no longer had a natural outdoors outlet that I used to have in all the other places I'd lived prior to then. I was always very outdoorsy, but I wasn't a climber. I knew climbers. I knew about the climbing scene, but I always thought it was like way too sceney for me. I just like being out in the woods. I was into backpacking and like I'd peak bagging and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started climbing the gyms and like I was immediately hooked, like mega hooked. And it's just kind of how I am. When I get into something, I don't do it half-heartedly at all. I just don't. And so I just got really psyched on climbing, and I was climbing the gyms, and I pretty soon thereafter was going out to Austin almost every weekend And I had a crew of guys. We were going out there like every week, and we'd do like 7-hour road trips. Like 3.5 hours there, climb all day, like sweaty as hell, like 100 degrees, 100% humidity.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, jump in the river and then drive home. And
Nice.
well, we'd stop in Austin and get margaritas too.
Nice.
But anyway, yeah. And so, but after a few years of that, I was like, man, this is not what I want to do. I could see the writing on the wall. Like I saw guys that were doing this stuff 30, 40 years, and some people were really into it, but I just knew it wasn't a good fit for me. Like the corporate life, especially the office life, it wasn't so much the work I was doing. It was just the office and kind of corporate grind. And so I started really looking to get out of Houston. I wanted to get back in the mountains. So I was able to get a job here in the Front Range, Colorado. And that, to make a long story short, I was really fortunate to get that. And so I ended up here. And that did it for a while. I was climbing a ton. Obviously, there's tons of climbing here. It was easy to do. I didn't have to drive 3.5 hours anymore. So that was a huge improvement. But it still wasn't clicking with my work life. And, when you're doing something 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week, when you start including not just the time you're in the office, but the commuting time, if you're getting food ready to eat at work, that all counts. The stress you bring home after 5 p.m., that all counts. So when you start adding up all the time that was spent doing that sort of thing and not doing other things that maybe are more important, like your family or your friends or your sports, I started getting really interested on ways I could somehow shift. And I had actually, when I was in Houston, like many young climbers, I got serious lust for like the dirt bag kind of like van life kind of lifestyle. I really did. And I actually literally brought this up with my wife on a number of occasions. Like, let's just do it. Like,
you guys were already married at this point?
No. So we got married the year we moved to Colorado. So we weren't married yet. We were probably engaged.
Okay.
And I was like, honey, let's just do it. Like there's so many good stories. People make it work. Like we're smart people. We'll make it work. And I don't doubt that maybe we would have, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was like, financially, it just seems like a huge risk. Like we're making good money. Let's just stay on. And I had a lot of resent for that. I'm like, man, I feel like I'm chasing a paycheck. I feel like I'm staying too comfortable. And then in 2015, oil prices collapsed. And in my industry, that was very bad news. Not as bad as they are now, but they collapsed from like $100 a barrel down to like 30. And that was huge. And so there were mass layoffs. So for about a year, 2 years, really, the last 5 years, it's just been on and off again, layoffs in that industry. And I managed to more or less avoid them all. I did have to jump companies a few times to avoid moving back to Houston. But basically, with the job being so insecure, and the fact that I didn't love it anyway, it's really easy to imagine how you end up on Google, right? And like, how can I get out of this situation? And I had a friend at the same time. We were kind of cut from the same cloth. He's still in the industry, but we have a lot of the same ideas on the subject. And he found this website called Mr. Money Mustache. And this guy is now legendary. He's not the first one to come up with these concepts of saving enough to retire early, but he certainly made it very presentable. And he has this like kind of moniker where he talks about always wanting to punch you in the face. Like he has a very much a pick you up by your bootstraps kind of like, get your ass in gear. Your life is filled with waste. You're spending money on crap you don't need. Save money, wisely invest it. Don't be stupid. Like he's that kind of guy. Okay. And that really appealed to me. Like a
no bullshit, just blunt in your face.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like that's totally me. Like that's my style. I kind of write that way myself. Even though I care deeply, I respond well to that personally. And so, and this finally was like, I'd kind of been getting into investing over the years because I had a little bit, we were making more money than we needed. And so I knew I needed to do something with that money, and I was kind of tinkering. But here was this very approachable guy, because I think there's this image of the investor as like a guy in a suit, with a briefcase and kind of chachi, like going to meetings. But many people, But I really like this idea of just this guy. He lives in Longmont, Colorado. He rides his bike everywhere. Like he's outdoorsy, and I'm like, man, I relate to that. And so, just like with climbing, I went head over heels for this instantly. I talked to my wife. At first, she was like, I don't know. It's like, we need to stop eating out. We're spending too much money. We're wasting money. Honey, if we saved all that money and we got into some simple investing, we could be done with our careers if we wanted to in 5, 10 years, maybe 12, 15 years. I don't know, but it'll work. She's like, But
And real quick, Chad, when you say this, you mean there is kind of a movement, right? This whole financial independence, retire early. I've heard that it's even an acronym, right? This FIRE thing.
FIRE, yeah, which I'm not, it's catchy. It's catchy, right?
Right.
But I hate to use it because it gets a bad rap, and I think it's the early retirement part that actually gets it a bad rap.
Okay.
It's the thing that brings people to it, but it also draws the most ire.
Interesting.
Because I think people think it's like a millennial movement for people who don't want to work.
Got it. Yeah.
And I completely agree. I think there is a bit of that. So it is a very big movement now, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, I'd say. But when I stumbled upon it, it was certainly growing, but it was not mainstream at all. And I think you're going to find it a lot more in mainstream media now. So yeah, it's very much a movement. And so, I fell for it just because I knew I was in work that I didn't want to do for 40 years. I do want to work, but I didn't want to do that kind of work forever. And me personally, I couldn't accept the financial risk of just stopping that on my own without a very large financial cushion. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we started doing. Yeah, so I don't know where you want to go from there. I mean, that's kind of the backstory on why we started doing this. And yeah, as of February of this year, I did leave that job. We got to a point where we could comfortably call ourselves financially independent, but I would never, ever, ever call myself retired.
Okay. And that's just simply because you enjoy work. Your goal is not to not work.
Yes.
Okay.
I think work is a fundamental aspect of happiness. That's actually probably what I'm more obsessed with, more than climbing or more than financial independence or any of this stuff. I think for me, it's all about the pursuit of what really makes us happy? What are we really chasing in life? I think that's what I'm really fascinated with. And I do think doing things that are hard and challenging and getting uncomfortable almost every day, I think it's an absolute requirement. And so right now, this project, this website is what I consider work. I don't get paid for it, but I get far more joy out of waking up to write about this stuff and help people than I ever did waking up to go to work. That's for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of background and context into your website and maybe what your vision is for it? Where it is now and what your vision is for it? Sure.
Well, I've always wanted to write. I've had this idea of writing for a long time, but I didn't really see a path of viability. The same thing, writers notoriously don't get paid very well. So it was another one of these ideas I've always had in my head. And they say, write about the things you care the most about, right? Or you know the most about. And so I know about climbing. And over the last 5 years, I've learned a hell of a lot more about personal finance. So I decided about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, to start this website where I would merge those topics because I knew that the financial independence movement was growing, but I didn't think a whole lot of climbers knew about it. And even though there's tons of bloggers and tons of people making content about this, I think it's all about relatability because, like I said, with the money mustache guy, he's all about no bullshit in your face, but some people aren't going to relate to that. And so everyone has their story or someone they're going to relate to more. And I thought, hey, there might be some climbers that would really be down with this message because like I said, I do think I, in many ways, represent the more average climber, the person who's working a job Monday through Friday and just wants to climb more and would love to climb more or spend more time with their family. So I was like, well, I can talk about how this kind of financial independence movement could relate to a lifestyle that would allow more climbing, if that's what you want to do, or whatever work you want to do. I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's freedom. And I think climbers love the idea of freedom. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. Let's back up a step then. I would love to hear more about, as you got excited about this and decided to kind of go all in on it, what did that look like? I mean, I know that you have an article that breaks down your investment strategy and some of the nuts and bolts and some of the specifics, but I'd be curious to hear in broad strokes. So you're working this job and you and your wife decide to prioritize investing a bigger percentage of your paychecks and really doubling down on that. And, within 7 years, you get to a point where you no longer have to work anymore unless you choose to.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so the basic premise of it, if we take a bird's eye view of the whole concept, is that you try and maximize your savings rate, because one thing that's that is very clear in any data, especially in America, but worldwide, any kind of developed society, is that when people make more money, they generally spend more money. And I think we all, when we don't have any money, it's easy to point the finger and say, rich people with all their stuff. But the truth is, and it's shown many times over in the data, is that usually when people get more money, they will buy things. Now, it may not be a Rolex. It might be like the nicest van in the lot, but it'll get spent,
Right.
And I think we've all seen this to some degree. I mean, unless you're just now coming out of college or whatever, and you're used to that kind of frugal lifestyle. But if you've ever gone and gotten a job that pays more than maybe more than $20,000, I think we've all seen how that creep can happen. And so we knew it was happening. We were naturally frugal. I will say that in the interest of disclosure. It's not like we were like crazy spenders and we have some amazing story of reining it in. We reined a lot in, but we didn't rein in. We weren't going nuts. We were going out to eat a lot. I worked in the restaurant industry for about a decade, and I love food. I think food's an art. I think food is worth paying for, and I was paying too much for it. I was doing it too often to really get that much more incremental value out of the purchase, right? And so you start, the first thing I always tell people is to go and to track your spending. And we can talk more about that when, if we wanted to get into specific kind of recommendations. But I think most people have no idea how much they really spend on things until they track it, just like weighing yourself, right? And so I'm getting off on a tangent. But anyway, so the bird's eye view is to just increase your savings rate. And so the next part is what you do with those savings. So let's just say you can bump your savings up from 10 to 30%. That's a big change. And I'd argue for a lot of people, it's not that difficult. What you do with those savings is you don't just park it in your checking account or your savings account, because that money is losing to inflation, right? Because every year the stuff you buy gets more expensive. Those are just natural economic forces. So you want to get your money outpacing inflation. And the best way to do that is to invest it. And there's a lot of ways to invest, but I find the simplest and most elegant and easiest and laziest, which we all love, is passive index fund investing. And I'm not going to bog you down with the basic is that you buy an index fund, which basically it approximates the performance of the entire stock market as a whole. Instead of you going out and trying to find who's going to be the next big winner, is it Tesla, is it BP, who cares? You just buy the entire stock market. So you can do that in one fund. It's surprisingly and fantastically simple. And so you're just betting that the economy as a whole will continue to get better over the long term. And there's cycles like right now where it's not, but we know those come and go on average every 10 years or so. But over time, economies improve, and if they don't, our whole world is broken, and we all have big problems, right?
we have bigger problems.
Yeah, and we can, and some people get into sustainability. There are index funds which only buy into sustainable companies. If you're interested in that, if you don't want to buy, a tiny piece of Walmart or something like that, if you're not into that, there are options for all kinds of flavors of people. But basically what you want to do is buy into the economy, because you have to believe we all want the economy to succeed. And so in doing so, your money in general, these index funds usually return about 7 to 10% on average. And that's way more than inflation. So over time, your money starts to exponentially increase. Your savings start to compound. So that grows 7%. The next year, that grows 7%. The next year, that grows 7% on average, right? So, any given year or month or day is all over the place, and you can't get lost in that noise. But so that's how, instead of just socking away, $10,000 a year and making it linear, you now make it exponential. And so that's why you can be done in, say, 10 years, instead of, if you put all that cash under your mattress, it could take 40 or 50 years. Sure. So you're relying on this compound growth. And if you need a real world example of what compound growth looks like, go pull a coronavirus curve. I mean, that's what it is, I mean, that's compound growth. Yeah, so that's the basics. And then at that point, you can withdraw those funds and you can sell shares to then fund your life. If you don't want to ever work again, you sell shares, small amounts at a time, and that is your income. Because your money will now produce its own income. It'll pay for your life. That compounding effect. So that's the basics. That's the kind of bird's eye view of it. But I think sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to get into a little bit more of your own personal story. So it sounds like you and your wife were able to you really went for this all in, and you were able to expedite that process to such a degree that within how long was it? 5 or 7 years.
Yeah.
You guys are set up. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest. We made good money. Like, that obviously helps expedite things. That helps us live a more quote unquote luxurious life. Although I would say we spend far less than the average American family by far.
Mm-hmm.
But if you only make $40,000, you're going to have, if you want to save 50% of your income, that's going to take maybe more sacrifice than if you make more, right? And so, I don't beat around the bush. I mentioned that many times on the website. We did have good income, which helps expedite it. But teachers do this, and there's I could link to many stories of teachers who were making $30,000, $40,000 who became financially independent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's very much, I think that's another problem with the movement. It's often been categorized as like something for, high income engineers and things like that. Sure, that helps, but I don't think that's required at all. So I think the first thing, it's really just an undying kind of persistent kind of message on like, what are we spending on that we really brings value to our life? We talked about this on the phone the other day. I don't want to give people the idea that they can only spend on the essentials and just live this austere life in a cold house, with no heat on. And you just have to find like what's important to you, if you're really into skiing, you can own, like a girl I just interviewed, Lauren Abernathy. She has like 9 pairs of skis between her and her boyfriend, but she's into skiing. But she doesn't go blow money on other stuff that's not important. You just have to decide what's important for you and quit spending money on all the other stuff. If you're not really that into eating out, then don't spend so much money eating out. But if you are, do it, But I think once you start analyzing your spending habits in that way, you'll find lots of slop. Everyone I've done this with has found lots of slop. It's just kind of inevitable.
Well, let's get into that then. So, as far as some of the investment strategies and stuff like that you just spoke to, I will go ahead and link those sorts of resources in the show notes for people so they can, dig into more of the nuts and bolts of that. I don't want to necessarily bore them with that. But I am really interested in this idea of tracking spending. And I would love to hear, you mentioned that was really eye-opening for you. It was interesting talking to you on the phone because that was one of my main questions was, to what degree are you asking people to sacrifice some of the things that make life enjoyable? Some of the creature comfort, some of the things that, I would argue along with you, like, a lot of the time going out to eat's worth spending money on and doing things that that bring us together with our community and things like that. So I guess I'm curious, what are some of the things that you discovered and your wife discovered as you were doing this exercise? What are some of the areas where you were spending a lot more than you expected that felt like easy things to cut out that weren't adding value to your lives?
Yeah, no, that is like the big ultimate thing for a lot of people. I think in general, especially outside the climbing community, the biggest thing that's blowing people up from doing this is spending too much. In general, I find climbers to typically be a bit more of a frugal bunch compared to society at large. That's obviously me generalizing very broadly. Mm-hmm. But I don't see too many climbers, rolling up in like Porsches and stuff like that. So,
maybe fancy Sprinter vans, but
yeah, right. So that's enough. I think that's where it manifests in the climbing community is maybe things like that. And that's fine. I don't have a problem. Again, it's all about finding a solution that works for you. And so it's dependent on your income level, which I think can be changed. It's dependent on savings level, which can be changed. So I guess for us, speaking more specifically, when we started tracking our spending, and that's another thing, like, with the times the way they are, I think investing is kind of a stretch right now for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And it seems insensitive to me to really be pounding the table on, you need to start investing. Like 30 million people in this country have lost their jobs at this point. And it's not lost on me, right? I'm fully aware of it. So I think the big thing I can recommend, and I do recommend often for people who email me, is to take this time to track your spending. I think it's so incredibly important. And so, to give a list of resources for that, in the personal finance community, the fan favorites are Mint, like the herb, mint.com, I think.
Mint.com.
Yeah. Mint,
and they make an app as well, right?
I believe so. Yeah, I think both of these, and then Personal Capital also, I believe, has an app. And they're both free. They don't cost anything. Now, my wife isn't really a fan of, like, stored passwords on the internet because you have to link all your bank accounts because it makes it really nice and seamless. And
Okay.
so we do it totally old school manual with an Excel spreadsheet. And I actually started this habit when I was applying to grad school, like back in 2007, because I had to apply for like these FAFSA loans. And I was like, hell, I don't know how much my life costs. I don't know how much to apply for. And I had no clue because
Sure.
I'm like so many people, you look at your checking account, and you're like, do I have money? Good. Okay, I'll spend it. If I don't, then shit, I need to make more money. Like
Right.
that's how I was. That's how most people are. And so I was like, I don't actually know how much my life costs. So I just wrote down everything for like a month or two, and it was really eye-popping. And I used that to apply to grad school, and I did that for years. And then when my wife and I combined finances, we started keeping our own combined. And so we've just been in this habit now for, well over a decade. And so it's just second nature to us. It's just like any other habit. You just have to kind of keep showing up. And we like the spreadsheet just because, I don't know, it kind of just forces us to get online and do it and be watching it. I think if it's all automated sometimes, automation's great in some senses, but bad in another because you don't pay attention to what's going on. So my recommendation is just to start doing that and divide it into as many categories as you can, because if you have a giant miscellaneous that has $1,000 in it every month, then that's probably hiding some skeletons, right? I mean, like
Interesting. Okay.
And yeah, that was my problem because I had all this stuff that I would just throw into miscellaneous. And I'm like, well, I don't know where to put it. And then all of a sudden it's like my biggest category. And I'm like, how can I optimize on that when I don't even know,
Interesting.
So in terms of value, so yeah, do that. I think you'll find some things, but this has been talked a lot about in the personal finance world. This is certainly not my ideas, but 80% of people's spending is usually 20% of their line items. And the big three, unsurprisingly, are usually housing, transportation, so your cars, any other sort of transportation, and then food. So I'd really put extra kind of close eyes on those three. A lot of people in the personal finance world have been like, quit telling people not to drink lattes. And it's kind of true. Like, I personally make my coffee at home, but $3 a day, yeah, that sounds pricey to me for something I can make at home. But, if you're also spending $200,000 more on a house than you probably needed, that's going to take a hell of a lot of lattes to make up that.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So I would really focus in on those big three. Like, could I get a roommate, even if I'm a homeowner? Like, that's a huge hack. If you can get roommates as a homeowner and have someone else pay your mortgage, my God, I mean, you're off to the races. That's huge. And, some people aren't into roommates. That's fine. It may not be your solution. It's not ours. We own our home. We don't have roommates. But ours was food. That's where we were spending too much. We were going out to eat once or twice a week, and then, depending on your alcoholism, I guarantee you won't get out of a decent restaurant without spending $40 on two people, And if you're slamming tons of margaritas, it's going to be even more. So that was our thing. And then transportation, right? I mean, like if you've got a big loan on a vehicle and, you feel like you need a new car every 5 years, I mean, you probably don't, right? I mean, and I can't, I have to be careful here because I'll fully admit I just bought a new Tacoma. But, that was a very calculated decision for us that we thought a long time about. And it's our only car. So we have one car between us. And, so that's why I don't want to come across as like overly this frugal miser. Like we do spend money, but we're very intentional about it. I think intention is the word. So I don't care what you spend it on. I really can't come up with anything that I can say, unquestionably no one should spend money on. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but I think it's just finding value. And I think once you start tracking it, you'll find those things. And that becomes especially true right now if you're in an unfortunate situation where you've maybe lost income or you've had income reduced. And it's going to be really important to take that step. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure. I'm just kind of rambling around.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm just deciding where to go next. So one thing I wanted to ask about real quick, because it was interesting talking to you on the phone and hearing about your food. You have a real passion for food and you dreamed of being a chef for a while. And it was really interesting to hear, as you guys as you realized that, oh, wow, I'm spending a lot more on food than I had thought. Even while it was important to you, you still decided that it was worth it to try to cut back on that. And then it was really interesting to hear how that actually improved your enjoyment, those really special moments when you went out to eat. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that's a whole other thing. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was our experience. So I spent a better part of a decade in restaurants, and I actually between undergrad and grad school, I moved out to Portland, Oregon to pursue it professionally, like kind of fine dining, like I was serious. And I was actually going to leave behind my degree in geology to do that. And so food's very important to me. I love the craft of cooking. I love the art of cooking. And so, yeah, so we were always, especially in Houston, that was the thing to do there. Like Houston, if you don't know, I mean, it sucks in so many ways, but it was fantastic for food. And you could eat anything. Like if you wanted to get a Sri Lankan pancake, you could find it. You know, like I don't know, I just made that up. But
it's probably true.
Yeah, you probably can. But I was just like in love with that, like total like foodie, whatever. And so I was still doing that, especially as we made a decent income. I was like, yeah, this is where my money's going. And we were always going out. So when I discovered this, like that was like me getting uncomfortable for a while. And I think that's where my wife kind of balked at it too. She's like, are you sure? Like, it's so fun to go out. And I'll be honest, for about a month, when Friday night came and we just came home and just stared at each other and we're like, oh, let's make dinner, I guess. Like that did kind of suck. And it took a little discomfort there. And then I think after about a month, like we got into a groove, and I had not really been cooking that much because I'd done it for years professionally. And, you know, the week's busy, so you just slam together like some little crappy whatever. And then we were going out on the weekends, and all of a sudden I got like this newfound love of making my own food again and really actually enjoying the craft of me doing it instead of paying for the craft of somebody else doing it. So I started really I was picking up new skills. And that's one thing I found: when you're not willing to pay for something, you usually learn something. Like if you're not willing to, you know, call a plumber, you're going to learn a few things on YouTube about plumbing and you'll save some money doing it. And so I love that acquisition of skills and a refinement of skills I'd had from, you know, professionally from working in the industry. So I think that's one thing with like the frugality thing that I think, again, I kind of have this fascination with facing a little bit of discomfort. Like, I don't know, you're in a van now, right? And you probably lived in a house or an apartment. I think you get used to that too. And you find joy and simplicity of a small space. You know, when I'm out camping or something and I'm in a tent, I don't have a van, I have a camper now. You know, you start to find joy in like simple things that you used to think would be uncomfortable or not good enough. And I talked to Chuck and Maggie Odette. They were one of my first interviews. And that's what they've told me many times in emails and on the interview I did with them, is that people always think like, how can you live in this 13-foot little cramped space? And they're like, you just find out what you need just by doing. And so I think a lot of our kind of tactful reduction in spending was a little bit of trial and error. Like I will admit, like 2016, I've written about this. That was like what I call the year of austerity.
Okay.
Where we got really into it and probably went too far and took the joy out of life sometimes. But I thought it was incredibly meaningful to kind of find that bottom line, because we know we can go there if times ever get lean, if we're in like another economic cycle like we are today, and we need to cut down. We know where we can go and still largely enjoy life. But we also, it was good to test the waters a bit, because now, you know, I spend freely on like travel and things, but I also think it's really important to understand there's usually ways you can spend less on the same thing. Like travel's a big one. There's a lot of ways to hack travel and to not pay sticker price.
Yeah, you wrote a really great blog post about your trip to Sicily. I'll point people to that.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah. And so we've traveled a lot to Europe and, you know, big international destinations and pay virtually nothing for flights. And that's a whole nother, you know, maybe we can just link to that because that's a whole nother discussion. There's a lot of ways to still have the same product or the same experience, but not paid. Like, you know, why pay $20 for something you can pay for $5 is another. So I spend a lot of time looking for ways to get the same experience without spending so much on it.
One thing I'd like to get into with that, I mean, a lot of people listening to this, and this was my thought too, actually, when I reached out and we first talked on the phone, you know, a lot of them are probably thinking, hey, I don't know if I'll ever have a job that pays me enough that I can get to this place where I can retire early in 10 years. Yeah. I don't know if I care enough or if I'm willing to give up all these creature comforts or compromise my enjoyment of life in the short term for that potential end result that doesn't feel realistic. It was really interesting, though, to hear you talk about how it's really a sliding scale. And you said something really interesting. You said that you think a position of financial strength is the most sustainable method for finding an enjoyable lifestyle. I'd love to hear what you have to say to people that aren't interested in maybe going the full way with this, but maybe what are your thoughts on, what kind of a difference have you seen it make for people when they do some of these little things and simply free themselves up by having, 6 months of savings where they're not stressed month to month to pay their bills, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because honestly, like when I first started this blog, I was like, I'm going to tell everyone about financial independence. I would say it's single-digit percentage of people will actually really, truly pursue it and achieve it, just because it feels too big. Or people don't have the income or the willingness to give up some things. Now, I mean, we could talk about, limiting beliefs on those sort of things and whether that's actually true or perceived. But I do think, there's another writer in this space. He's one of the legends too. His name's J.L. Collins, and he's great. You should look him up. He has a great voice, and he's like a great storyteller. And he always talks about F.U. money, and you could figure out what that stands for. But it's the power, really, of financial strength, and I'd really prefer that maybe than talking about retiring early or anything silly like that. I think if you can get people financially strong, and that could be 6 months of living expenses, that could be 3 months of living expenses, it could be 5 years of living expenses. Like, that's incredibly empowering, because how many times have we all done something for money, for our jobs, that we didn't want to do, or that felt wrong, or could have been downright illegal or unethical? I think far more people have been in those situations than we'd like to admit, because we feel like we have to, because we feel like we're trapped. And if we don't do what the boss says, then we could lose our jobs. And then what? It's a scary, scary proposition. And when you have, that FU money, like, it is incredibly empowering. And long before I was able to walk away from my job or be in a position where I could, I started making my job a hell of a lot better, because I felt it's like the Office Space effect. People talk about it all the time, and it's absolutely true.
I've heard you talk about this. I love it.
Yes. and I've heard so many people on other podcasts talk about this. It is absolutely magical that when you don't feel like you need that paycheck, all of a sudden you have this absolute incredible strength, and you can assert yourself in ways that you would never think you could. I just stopped going to meetings that I thought were stupid. No one ever said anything. I started speaking my mind in meetings when I normally thought, like, this is completely a voice of discontent. They're not going to like this. And people would turn their heads and be like, oh, say more.
Interesting. Wow.
Everyone, especially in corporate America, toes the line. Look, we all do it. And I did it too for years. Like, we just say what we think we should say, or we behave how we think we should behave, or we don't take vacation we know we have because no one else takes vacation. And when you don't care about whether the next paycheck comes, or you care a lot less, it is powerful. So I think that is far more doable, and is doable for almost anyone. I know not everyone comes from a position of privilege. There really are people who do struggle to even put food on the table. But I think, for people in this audience, if you've got a cell phone, if you listen to podcasts, you got a smartphone, you can probably find some version of this for yourself. And it is absolutely a sliding scale. It's not a light switch at all. It's not like you are financially independent or you're not, and you're like a loser or you're not. It's like you either are beholden to a paycheck forever, or you have some position of financial strength, and you can stay in that job, but you can also assert yourself in ways, or take time off. I mean, like we talked about on the phone, for every year you save 50% of your income, you buy a year of freedom. And that's on linear terms. When that money starts compounding, you might be buying yourself 3 years off. So that's the way I like to think of it. And that may be a great solution for a climber if they just really, really, really want to go on a trip, and that's their position of financial strength. If you can save a year's worth of living expenses, then, if you save 50% of your income for 1 year, you can go travel for 1 year and not have to cut your spending at all. So there's a lot of knobs to turn. There's a whole lot of knobs to turn.
So you briefly mentioned just a few minutes ago that when you and your wife were really first starting to explore this, at one point you kind of took it too far, and you guys, in hindsight realized okay, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel sustainable. We're giving up too much of what we love about life in order to, this means to an ends thing, and we're not really loving the means right now. It doesn't seem worth it.
Yeah.
How do you think about that now? How do you think about balancing that? And I guess generally, I don't know, I guess it must feel like a big sacrifice for a lot of people who haven't considered this sort of approach. If they haven't tried it before, I'd be curious to hear what it feels like for you. You know, how much of a struggle was it? Was it easier than you thought it would be? Was it harder? Would you have gone back and done any of it differently? Is that a good question? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you're asking.
Okay.
I found it easier and faster than I expected.
And you were still able to climb during all that time?
Oh, yeah. No. There's one thing I won't give up, and it's climbing. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this is to be able to climb more. So
Right.
so the year of austerity, as I call it, 2016, right? I went to Ceuse. I was in France for 2 weeks, and it was fantastic. And it's one of the best trips I've ever been on. My wife and I look back at it lovingly, with starry eyes all the time. So I want to be clear, I wasn't living like a monk on the hill.
Yeah, you weren't working 80 hours a week and not sleeping.
No.
Right.
Yeah. No, I didn't try and push my career any further. We focused too much on probably saving a little bit too often, not even enjoying the occasional meal out. Maybe obsessing too much over every single dollar when, again, it's usually 80-20, right?
Can you speak to that real quickly for people that aren't familiar with that principle? That's Pareto's principle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you got the actual name for it. So usually, and it's the same with training. We're both into training too. It's usually people obsess over all the wrong things, and that usually 80 you can improve your situation. Let's see, 20%. Put 80%. Wait, no, now I'm messing it up. So basically,
I'll help you out. The way I understand
maybe you could explain
is
it.
by focusing your efforts on 20% of the inputs, you really get 80% of the results from just that 20%.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And that's true with because we listen to training podcasts and all this stuff. And usually people are trying to do everything. They're trying to run and hangboard and campus and do all this stuff when, maybe it's just your hips are too tight. Right. That's my story anyway. But,
interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, the 80-20 thing, I was trying to obsess over every dollar we spent, everything we ever bought, could that be optimized when it's man, I probably would have spent maybe $2,000 more that year and it wouldn't have mattered at all.
Okay.
But instead you just obsess. Whereas, get, again, the big things, the 80-20 thing, get the big things right. Focus on what you can with your housing, your food, and your transportation and things like that. And a lot of that other stuff's just noise. Make sure you're putting your effort into the things that'll matter the most. And so we still spent a good chunk of money to travel that year. And that was 100%, 110% worth it. I love that trip. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't think we sacrificed that much. And really, once you get these habits ingrained, especially with the compounding effects. Now, granted, up until February of this year, the stock market has killed it for the last 11 years. Mm-hmm. And so we were benefiting by that for sure. And that's been a common sentiment from people who have done this, that they thought it would take X many years and it ends up happening faster than expected. Because, some of that might be market behavior. Some of that might be your own personal behavior that you get really into this and you do a really great job saving more, or a lot of people start picking up what they call side hustles. I don't really like the term, but whatever, supplemental sources of income. Uh-huh. They start maybe walking some dogs on the side, or little silly things that may have seemed beneath you, but all of a sudden it's money coming in. And a lot of these, sources of income aren't that hard to come by, or, teachers in the off season can pick up, so there's little things like that all of a sudden expedite the process. I really don't think, for us speaking specifically, I don't think we sacrificed a hell of a lot. I think by my standards, we live a luxurious life. We don't have nice things, but we judge luxury by experience, and we get to travel a lot. I'd love to go on more climbing trips. That's what I'm hoping to do, but I'm married to a woman who doesn't climb, so there's challenges there. But I think by and large, I climb outside, even when I was working, I climbed outside twice a week. I'd climb in the gym twice a week. I had everything I needed, so I'm happy. I don't feel like it was a sacrifice at all.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. And I think one thing I'd want to point out that I really appreciate about your approach too is just a reminder to people that it's not about ending up on a beach somewhere at age 35 and never having to work again. The amazing thing about having a little bit of financial freedom, enough to not have to stress about a paycheck, is that you get to ask yourself what it is that you really want to do.
Exactly.
And in your case, it's amazing to see your blog and to see that, you're not trying to make money off this thing. You just want to help people.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, and that's you remind me of an important point. I get emails from people who are trying to consider, like they've gotten really into climbing and they want to pursue something that's, maybe they've got a degree in like engineering or whatever, but they just want to climb a bunch and want to, even some of these services like notoriously low paying jobs, like even guiding or things like that. Like people are hesitant to get into it because they hear it doesn't pay well. And I'm like, well, hell, if you've got some living expenses saved up, then give it a go. I got no problem with it. Like, just put yourself where you've got a backup plan. Like, that's my kind of thing. And I think these same methods can be used to just start something you're more passionate about that won't lead to financial ruin. And I'm not saying guiding or any of these things will lead to financial ruin, but they can. I mean, some of these jobs just pay notoriously terribly, or they have, ephemeral client bases that kind of come and go. I mean, we could name hundreds of jobs that are a little bit more insecure on the income side. But if you come into it with some sort of base that even may just be a year or two's living expenses, I mean, that's really powerful too. Because then you feel like you've got time to tinker. You've got time to explore. You've got time to optimize. Whereas you don't need money from day one. Like, I think that leads to a lot of like kind of spammy stuff where people are desperately trying to sell because, man, they got to get money, like, or this thing's going to fail.
Yeah, take whatever they can get.
Yep. So if you've got some room to breathe, you can take more chances, right?
Okay, I really want to make sure that people come away from this conversation with something tangible. Like, okay,
sure,
he's mentioned tracking spending, but, and he's mentioned investing, but like, what is it that I should actually go do? Is this a good time to transition to that?
Yeah, sure. I think number one for everyone, I always tell everyone to do it, is tracking your spending. Like we already talked a bit about that. You can get an app or you can do it on your own with a spreadsheet. I can help you with that.
Are you willing? I think I asked you this on the phone, and I would love to check in on it. Are you willing to share a spreadsheet template that we could share with people? That'd be great.
I think I've either got one or I could put one together.
Perfect.
I wrote a post on this, and I had to make a blank kind of. I've got an image on the post of like a blank template for our live.
Okay.
And you could custom suit it. Obviously, I can't make one for everyone. That's you would have to tweak it, but it's real simple. I mean, it's just a list of categories, and then we do it month by month. And I could put something together, no problem.
Awesome, that'd be awesome.
And so that's what I recommend people start with, just because you got to have an understanding of money in and money out. A lot of people also don't know what their take-home pay is. Like. I didn't either. I mean, you might know your salary, but like, what do you actually pull in? Like, what is available to spend? What's taken out in taxes, that sort of thing. So all that should be tracked. That's number one. And then, especially now with the way things are, I mean, I don't want to sound alarming, but the economy is in bad shape, and a lot of income sources, I think, if they're not threatened yet, potentially can be. So I would really start. Forget about investing. Just give yourself 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So step one is find out how much your life costs and find out how much a month of your life costs and multiply that by 3 to 6. And I'd get that into a high yield savings account. You can look online for these a lot. There's Ally Bank, CIT Bank, I believe is what they're called. Those are going to do a lot better than your traditional savings account. And you can just park that money there. Obviously you need to keep some in a checking account because you got to pay bills and things. So keep at least a month's worth of living expenses there.
How does that work? Is that something you can pull out at any time, or is it stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, usually at most they might have like a business day or something delay on moving funds.
Okay.
But usually it's a lot of these. I mean, those accounts may even just do it automatically. So it's just like a traditional savings account, but you get better interest rates.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I would do that, and then. That I think is just kind of for anyone. There are people who don't believe in emergency funds. They just think you should invest the money. I don't think that advice applies for most people. It doesn't apply for me. We don't do that. We actually have a lot more in cash just as a savings. We have well over a year living expenses because that's just our comfort level.
Okay. That's just risk and comfort and...
Yeah, because basically my wife's still working, but if she wasn't and we wanted to sell shares of stock to live off of, the risk there is if you sell in a down market, you're having to sell more shares to fund your life. Mm-hmm. And so that can be risky and that could cause you to run out of money sooner. So having that cash buffer kind of allows you to not have to do that during bad times.
Okay.
If you need it. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just, that's a whole nother strategy, and we could go off into left field on that stuff.
Gotcha.
But,
Okay.
So we keep more, but some people keep less. I would say people should aim for 3 months at a minimum, 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Happy number. And then, and for those of you who are fortunate to have a good job and you get into this stuff and you're saving more, then I would start looking to invest that money and get it work for you. And we don't have to talk about that. We can link to those kind of sources, and I recommend you check other places too. Don't just listen to me. But I think you'll find that there's a lot of overlap, and you'll find it's amazingly, beautifully simple. It does not need to be complex. I'm not pouring through investor reports and reading all the financial news. Blah, no, you don't have to. So, but that's for people who are, have got some margin. But I just encourage everyone to find margin where you can. Those are kind of the basic first steps.
So step 1, find out how much your life costs. Step 2, calculate that number, multiply it by 3, put away that much in the type of savings account that you mentioned. What was that type of savings account?
High yield
savings account.
They just have better interest rates.
Okay. And then if you can, the investment strategies and potentially investing a bunch of money into some sort of an index fund, something really simple where you're not paying someone else to manage your money. And I will be sure to point people to some resources that have been helpful to me in that regard as well.
And that's another thing. I'll just interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
We don't have a financial advisor. I don't think it's necessary. It's absolutely not necessary. Like, this is all DIY stuff. And, and the investing thing, that's a lifestyle play. Like, if you guys are psyched on this and you love this idea of financial independence or even partial financial independence or whatever, that's the next step. I'm not saying I didn't come on here to tell everyone they need to do that to have the ultimate life, but I get far more emails from people who are just like, man, my financial life is a mess. Where do I start? That's far more what I'm interested in, is just getting people on a good footing. And then, if you get good habits, things follow suit.
One thing I'd love to ask, one of the reasons I was excited to have you on is in our conversation on the phone, I was like, okay, this guy is his own success story. I really am, I was really impressed by that. You're not just some armchair guy throwing out theories, like you've actually done it for yourself and made it happen. I'd be curious though, speaking to these couple steps that you just mentioned, these tangible things that people can do, have you received feedback from people or do you have any other testimonials? And what are people experiencing if they follow these steps and get to a point where suddenly they have 3 months safety net for the first time in their lives? Have you heard any feedback like that from people? And what is that kind of doing for people?
A lot of these conversations, like many email conversations, I don't always get the end story. I'll give some feedback and then you never hear from people. So sometimes I don't know how well it goes for people. I just had one the other day. He was really engaging and he told me that, he was one of these guys who was like, I'm kind of overloaded. This is all great. I love all this stuff. I just don't know where to start. And that's another thing. Like, I think a lot of this, like if you're into like the habit research or mindset research, a lot of this is just rooted in that kind of stuff. And there's some really great, really digestible kind of materials like James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and things like that. A lot of this is just good habits. So what I told him, like, because he said he's just kind of overwhelmed, like he doesn't really know, and he's kind of like all over the place. And so I recommended to him, what I do is I schedule my day. Even now, especially now, because I'm not working, I think it's incredibly important, especially because people are dealing with boredom and things like that. Like, I start every day with a schedule for every hour of my kind of productive window of my day. And I don't schedule, beyond like 4 p.m. because that's just kind of, fun time. But otherwise, I put like annoying things that you don't want to do. And for you, that may be starting a spreadsheet to track your spending. Like, it may sound terrible. So put it on the clock for 9 o'clock, man. And like, it's far more likely to get done if it's on your schedule. And the more you don't want to do it, the more you should probably schedule it. And he told me he had started tracking his spending, but he'd kind of kept it in notebook, I believe, and it kind of just lost track on that. And it's just one of the things. It's like, I recommend, making something formal, make it a nice spreadsheet, make it something you want to show up and work on, color code it, make it look pretty. Like my wife, like, she made it look beautiful. Mine looked like crap. But when she took it over, like, she put little dollar signs on everything and like had a nice grayscale. Like, it's a nice looking document. I get excited to open it now.
I love it.
Yeah, little things like that just make it easier to show up on it. just make it easy. That's kind of like what I came away from reading like James Clear's book. It's like, I think he has like 4 things. He like, make it easy, I don't remember what his 4 things were, but I do remember make it easy. And so if you put barriers in the way, you won't do it.
Sure.
So
yeah.
try and take down all those barriers.
And it is so interesting. There is so much science supporting the power of just tracking things.
Yep.
Whether it be finances, whether it be your weight for weight loss, whether it be your training. I mean, it's miraculous things happen. It's almost magic. It seems that if you just write it down, measure it and write it down every day, things tend to trend in the right direction without you really consciously doing anything.
Exactly.
We were talking on the phone. I remembered a great story. I've got a buddy in Bend, Oregon, my friend Ceuse Williamson, and I was hanging out with him a few months ago, and he was telling me that at one point in the last year, he'd become interested in tracking his own spending and just kind of being a little bit more financially frugal to free himself up for a potential road trip. And he bought a giant piece of poster paper, and he put it on his wall in his flat. And all he did was just write down the amount of money he spent, I think, each week. And that's all he did. He didn't have a goal. He didn't have, an amount that was too much or not enough or whatever. He just wrote down the amount, and it just seemed like almost magically that number just crept down in the right direction on its own.
Exactly. It's a system.
He just put it on the wall where he could see it. And it just created, it just led to all these subtle little subconscious decisions and habits, to your point, new habits that improved his frugality. I found that super interesting.
Yeah, it's so true. And, and I've heard guys like Steve Bechtel, some of these guys have really great, insightful quotes. And James Clear had another one. I think it's like his tagline for the book, and I have no relationship with James Clear. I keep mentioning him. I'd love to have him. So if you're listening, but he's like, you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems or something like that. And that resonates so much with me because, we all have goals. Every basketball team at the beginning of the season wants to win the championship, but only one does. And so goals are only go so far. But it's more like the systems you put in place to achieve them are really what matter in the end. So I think it's just these little things that keep you kind of showing up, and the goal will happen kind of naturally.
Let's get into that. I'd love to hear if are there any other systems that you've put in place for yourself that have helped you with this sort of stuff? You just mentioned planning your day and putting in, that 9 a.m. track my spending sort of thing. Is there anything else that comes to mind that's been especially impactful for you?
Yeah, I think, scheduling my day is really important for me. I know that's not going to fit for everybody, but that's huge for me. On the financial front, once a month, we also track our net worth. So that's, once you're into tracking your spending, you also want to know, you have assets, those are your accounts. Those may be investment accounts, checking account, savings account, any property, whatever. And you have liabilities, which are all your debts. So that could be student loans, consumer debt, mortgage. And so we track that once a month. We found it very intoxicating, really great to see that every month. And we do it on the 15th of every month, and we get so excited, it's savings day. And we would manually do that. And so that was kind of like a little fun thing. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because you start to see that improvement. And it's just that's why I think people love hangboarding so much, because it's the one thing you can put a number to. You're I can hang more weight off my fingers than I did a month ago, even though you may not be a better climber, but it's been my experience. But it's so intoxicating.
Right.
It's so intoxicating. So that's a big one. Tracking spending, tracking net worth. Once you get into that, it's really good exercise to kind of just check all your accounts. A lot of times have you looked at your 401k lately? If you have one, I hadn't until I got into this habit. I never checked that stuff. And so if you're just seeing the progress, so just seeing that progress, it just leads to more other good habits. Honestly, on the money side, that's really about it. I don't really do. That's why I love this stuff. I don't think about finances other than now I do because I write about it all the time. But in terms of actually what I do for my life, it's about a once a month exercise. We track our spending we do that maybe twice a month. We're kind of loose on that. We don't actually have that scheduled. And then on the 15th, thereabout of every month, we check our net worth. And that's it. That's all we do. Everything else is automated. There's systems in place with some of these accounts where you can just automate deposits. We don't do anything. So that's kind of the beauty. Like, I don't think you have to be that motivated. That's why I keep joking that climbing is way harder. Like, you have to do things multiple times a week. You have to think about every meal you eat. And I think that's way more exhausting.
It's also really hard to know what's working sometimes.
Exactly.
Right.
To be optimized as an athlete is like an everyday, hour by hour kind of thing. To be optimized on your finances it's a couple of days a month. Now, that's not true. I guess if you really struggle with spending, it is going to be more conscious. Like, you're going to have to, like, if you, maybe every morning you got to think, like, do I want to buy coffee or whatever? You know, that's a bad example. But, I don't want to be, I guess in the interest of full disclosure, I am kind of naturally frugal. But if you're not someone who is that, you will have to put more effort into it. I shouldn't sound too dismissive of that. But.
Sure. Well, I would actually like to return to the spending portion as well, just
Sure.
as far as getting into more stuff that's tangible for people to take away from this. So you spoke to the big three, the big three areas where we spend, kind of getting back to the 80-20 thing. It's probably 80% of our expenses come from these three things. So that was your home and your food and your transportation. You mentioned potentially getting a roommate if you're a homeowner, someone to help pay your mortgage. And you also mentioned, your own personal story, you and your wife, really thinking about, okay, how often do we really need to go out to eat versus maybe it'd be fun to get back into cooking. Are there any more, maybe let's go through each of those three. Are there any other things that you guys have done or that you've advised people to do or that you've heard from people that have reached out to you? Any other things that have helped in each of those three areas?
If I do it again, I would definitely look at housing differently.
Okay.
We bought our house in 2013, and it's an urban area, it's expensive. So we paid a good bit for it. And our mortgage is certainly above average for like the nation, but Front Range is expensive. Everybody knows that. So if I did it again, I would have looked long and hard, either having roommates or getting some sort of duplex and renting out the other half. That is huge, because if you can. And when I say big three, like housing, transportation, transportation and food are a very distant second and third. Housing's usually number one by a long shot.
Okay.
I've interviewed a number of people now, not because they're pursuing financial independence or anything, just because I think they have interesting lives and might have something to offer. And I've been surprised to find that more times than not, I think Mike Doyle, I think Hazel Finlay, several people who are now recent homeowners. I don't think Mike's recent, but anyway, they all have roommates. And I'm like, that's fantastic. They don't even know I don't even know if I'm sure they did it for financial reasons, or maybe they just like living with their buddies. But that's like a common thing mentioned in the personal finance world. It's like I think people don't even know how good of a thing they're doing. I really recommend that to people, especially if you're young and you're used to living with your buddies anyway. You can often buy a home without putting a whole lot of money down. And if you can get other people living there paying the mortgage for you, and that's a secure source of income, and they're not going to bail on you, and they're your friends and you're going to let it slide or something, that is extremely powerful. And then you can eat out all you want. Like, if you don't have housing costs, I can't impress upon you so we just paid off our mortgage, and that's 30%.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's 30% of our spending gone.
Wow.
It's huge.
Wow, 30%.
And that's not uncommon. That's 30% of actually, a lot of people will tell you that you can spend 30% of your income on your home. That's 30% of our spending. It would have been far less of our income. But if people are spending 30% of their income, then it might be 50% of your spending. So,
can you help me understand the differentiation there?
Yeah. So, because we don't spend, we had quite a high
spend 100% of your income.
Yeah. But a lot of people do.
Yeah, the difference is savings.
Yes. So our spending, it was 30% of our spending. Okay. But if you just Google, like, how much should I spend in housing? Like, a lot of just normal sources, not optimized sources, but people will tell you, spend 30% of your income.
Got it.
And for a lot of people, they're spending more. Like, if your income is low, but you live in an urban area, if you only make like maybe 40 grand or 30 grand or something like that, but you live in like Boulder, you're probably spending a lot more than 30% on housing, unless you live with a whole bunch of people. Mm-hmm. it's not inconsequential at all. And so I think that's a huge one. If you can lower your housing expenses, now whether that might be moving to a different part of town that's not as desirable, or maybe you got to ride your bike further or whatever, or if you already own a home and can rent it out or have roommates. In a pre-COVID world, I'd tell you to, we were already considering maybe doing a little bit of Airbnb in our own current house, especially when we travel. Mm-hmm. Little things like that can make a huge difference. And then you don't have to worry about lattes.
Got it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Any recommendations for renters?
For renters, yeah.
Buy a house?
No, I actually don't, Rick. So there's a big misconception that like a house is like a great investment. The house you live in is usually not a great investment.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I did a post on this too. I broke it down. I actually used all our real numbers. It's the only place I've actually used real numbers. I usually don't say any of our numbers on our website, but I laid it all out for that one just to do the math for everyone. And we have made money on the house, but it's not nearly as much as you'd think, especially on the Front Range. Everyone, with the housing market shooting up over the last 10 years or 5 years, it's not as good as you would think because people forget how much money you put into a house too. Renovations, and if a mortgage is debt and it has interest and you're paying a lot of interest for a long time, you don't even touch the principal. You're just paying straight up interest for the first many years of a mortgage, unless you're paying a lot of extra. So it's not usually that great of a deal. Now, that being said, I'm a huge fan of being a homeowner. I love it for many intangible reasons. But if you're a renter, you might have a lot more opportunity. Like there's opportunity costs with owning a home. Like you have to put down a big fat down payment. Well, if I'd invested that, I'd probably have more money now.
Oh, right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'd have just invested that money, and I kind of break that all down in that post, there is an opportunity cost because you have to have a down payment. And there's a lot of nuances there that we won't go into. I mean, there's a whole can of worms on is home ownership good or bad. But for renters, again, roommates, obviously, like, a 1-bedroom in Boulder is going to go for a hell of a lot more than if you got a 3-bedroom house with 3 people. Obviously, there's a lot of geographic differences in the price of rent and homes. Like if you want to be in the trendiest, greatest part of town, you pay for that. And sometimes just moving like a mile away could drop your rent 30%, 50% maybe. I'm not telling people to go live in the ghetto just to save money. You have to find that balance. But a lot of times people will pay a premium to be in like trendy areas. There's no doubt about it. And I, in full disclosure, I'd say we're maybe a little bit guilty of that. I mean, I think we live in a good neighborhood. And personally, I think if I did it again, I'd probably move like a mile west and we would have probably paid a lot less. And with the same quality of life. So you kind of have to ask yourself those questions. And we bought this house before we were all into this financial stuff. And so, man, I'd do it differently. That's for sure.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just one more knob to twist or lever to pull.
Yes. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with renting at all. I don't want to give the impression there's anything wrong with renting. We're actually maybe considering doing it again if we sell this house. Like maybe we'd rent for a little while or...
Okay.
There's pros and cons of both. Like we had a meltdown of like a water flooding event in our basement last summer. And believe me, man, that'll make you just like curse the day you ever bought a home. But most of the time I love it. So, there's pros and cons.
So you were just speaking about some of the guests that you've had on your blog. If people haven't read it, you do a number of interviews with a lot of names that people would recognize. And of course, this is how you and I connected, because you had done an interview with Mike Doyle. And it was really fun as we were prepping for this. I was looking through your list and I was like, oh wow, he's had Jonathan and Tara and Mike on the blog.
Yeah.
And they've been on the podcast. And then, you've also interviewed Hazel Finley and Dave McLeod, Steve Bechtel, Paige Klassen. I was like, oh, those are all people I want to have on the podcast too. So it was kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole and read some of those. But I'd love to ask, how has that experience been for you? Have there been any key insights from these people or takeaways that have stood out to you from these interviews?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, first of all, I'm jealous that you actually got to sit down with some of these people and talk for I just had to like email, so it's not nearly as fun. But no, I am like eternally grateful. I honestly never expected to talk to any of these people. I'm nobody in the climbing community. I'm not connected in any way really meaningfully at all. But these people, that's like the beauty of our sport, is that you get to play on the same playing fields and meet these people, and they're so approachable.
Oh, it's the best.
Fantastic people, all of them, really. like, could you imagine me like writing an email to LeBron James and getting a response? Like, no way.
Right, exactly.
And just about everyone I've emailed is not only email me back, but we're like more than excited to do it. So no, some big lessons, in part, I'm probably biased. I reach out to people I really want to talk to because I have personal reasons, because I think because we probably have things in common.
Sure.
I'm probably not willing to talk to just anyone because I don't think everyone really fits, especially with my website. I first thought I was only going to talk to people who were doing something like either lifestyle or financial. Like my first obvious target, because I'd followed them for a while, was Chuck and Maggie Odette, who I already mentioned. And I kind of was just fascinated with them because I was like, oh man, they're doing this just like I would. Like I always was fascinated with the dirtbag life, but they kind of waited till they were more or less retired to do it. And so I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so I couldn't wait to have an excuse to email them.
Cool.
And then I just kind of was like opening this up more. I talked to Mark Anderson, who is a friend. He's maybe the only person I know that climbs really hard that I actually know. And he was really psyched on this because I mentioned this to him early on, this project. And it turns out I always had a feeling he was doing the same thing, and he was. And we just never really talked about it because money's taboo and no one talks about money. And so he was a great interview subject for obvious reasons because he was doing the exact same thing with similar goals. But otherwise, none of these people are really like, I don't reach out to them because they're pursuing financial independence. I just think I have this obsession with like finding a sustainable lifestyle. And I'm like, okay, how are you doing it? Like Jonathan Secrets, like you get to climb all over the world. You're a 515 climber. Like you get paid to do this. How is that possible? Like, what is it about you that enabled this? And for him, obviously, it's being not only a really great climber, but having a personality that's very approachable. That guy just has infectious psych, and we all know it. And we love hearing about him. And like your podcast with him was incredibly great because, I mean, what a great guy, And so, but one thing stands out to me with Dave McLeod, like that guy. I mean, if you've never heard of Dave McLeod, I know I'm sure have, but for anyone out there listening, like, go block a half day away and prepare to be blown away. Like that guy is so incredibly amazing. And he gave me one quote. I don't even know if it's his, but he just says, to be exceptional, you have to do what others aren't willing to do, something along those lines. And I think that's so incredibly insightful and so incredibly true. I don't think a lot of these people have any real superpowers. Maybe there's some genetic gifts there for climbers and things like that. But a lot of people who really stand out and we all admire do things that most of us aren't willing to do. And I can't think of anyone on the list of people I've admired who that's not true for. Like Jonathan's an incredibly hard worker, as best I can tell. He works really tirelessly to be a great climber. Dave McLeod, that guy's a training genius. He reads literature. He studies everything he can about climbing and about exercise science.
He's got a great video log that he does.
Everyone should go check those out.
Yeah, I'll link to those. Those are fantastic.
And guys like Chris Hampton, who I interviewed, like that guy works tirelessly on his company, Power Company. Mm-hmm. These people are not slackers, and like he probably started that so he could be like more into climbing. But I mean, he probably works his ass off now, and he's into it.
Right.
And I love this idea of really, really hard work and effort. And I'm kind of fascinated with that. And it's something I try and apply to myself every day. You got to be willing to do what others are not. And it's amazing where that'll take you. And it can take you in climbing, it can take you in finances or relationships. And so that's kind of what I've come away with is like all these people have done something probably that others were not willing to do, even if they don't know it. And I kind of try and flesh that out of them because I can usually kind of see it as an outsider looking in. And I kind of try and dig that out of them. Like, what's your exceptional thing? Like, where did you put in the work? And a lot of times they're kind of humble, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know, I just climbed a lot and loved it. But I'm like, no, come on. A lot of people climb a lot and love it. But you're something else,
Right.
Like, I know you're something else for a reason. And so that's probably what I've come away with is that all these people are incredibly passionate about what they do. And they're willing to really work for it because lots of people are passionate about climbing and about building businesses. But I think that next level of effort really goes a long way.
I love that quote from Dave. I think so many people are either afraid or just unwilling to not be normal, or they think it's bad to not be normal. But it's like, well, hey, if you want, abnormal results, it might not make sense to be normal in every way.
Yeah. And Mark Anderson, he's talked about this, right? I mean, because a lot of the golden era of training is due to their book, I would argue, about like the hangboarding craze. And he talks about it, and we've talked about it in person. Like, he used to hangboard at the gym, and people would look at him like he had 3 heads, like, 10, 15 years ago. And now, who isn't hangboarding, right? I mean, and now it's a thing that everyone does. But it used to be like a thing only weirdos did. And so, yeah, I love that concept of being the oddball out,
Something you just said triggered something. I'd love to transition with that. So you were just speaking to effort and how significant an insight or how enlightening an insight that has been, that, it seems to come back to effort over and over. And I found a quote from you. I was reading one of your articles, and the quote is, "If there is any fountain of youth, any magic elixir, it's effort." That really caught my attention. That was from an article called "The Fallacy of Happiness in Meaningful Work." Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's a pretty new post. That's a couple weeks ago. It gets back to this like grand vision of mine. I'm like of trying to pursue like the best life, because I think if I would have just quit my job, a year and a half in, I'm not sure I would have found happiness that I thought I would find. And I kind of give a story. I think I give a story in that article talking about, like you see all these pictures of paradise online and beautiful beaches, and then you get there and it's maybe not so great. It's like really hot and sweaty, and there's people everywhere, and it's like, well,
there's mosquitoes.
That's too easy. Like that, like of course it's not so great. Like, but I think probably my greatest satisfactions in life have come from pushing through something. And just like we were talking about, with these other great people who you've interviewed, who I've interviewed, I think all these people have faced something that they had to push through. And I find that a lot of times people want to run from something more times than they honestly want to run to the next thing. They're just kind of bummed where they are. And maybe it's a job, because I'll tell you, my first 2 years of my job, I hated it, but it got a lot better. But, I had to put effort into it. And relationships are that way. We'll meet someone and we'll be like, I don't know, they're just not for me. I'm like, well, hell, I mean, who's perfect, right? Like, like I've been married for, it's embarrassing. I can't even come up with a number, 8 years, almost exactly. And like, that takes effort, marriages are not easy day in and day out. And so I'm just kind of fascinated with this, and I read a lot about this stuff. And so that's why I get into it. But I think a lot of times in a lot of emails I get, like people want to pursue some sort of, like they just don't want to work in a corporate life, or they don't want to do this, but they just want to, like they think if you just run to that greener grass, everything will be fine. But I think what I've come to, and a lot of the research suggests, is that, building a craft and really working at it and spending years on building that craft is what really makes people happy, especially when it comes to job satisfaction. And I talk about a great book in there. It's by Cal Newport called "Be So Good," or "So Good They Can't Ignore You." And it's actually a
great book.
Yeah, it's a Steve Martin quote. And that was his major advice. And it's astonishingly simple. But if you're so good at something, then you can't be ignored. But to get so good, you have to put in years honing a craft. And it's just my caution to people to not get disillusioned. I think whether that's in climbing or training or in a job or in school, we all face tough times. I think there's a lot to learn by the grit and the adversity, those sort of tools you get out of pushing through difficult things. In hindsight now, I'm glad I didn't leave my job at 2 years in, and now I have this kind of gift of financial independence. But I had to grind through multiple times where I wanted to walk out. I mean, there were months on end where I should have just walked out, and maybe I should have. But in the end, I made it a really good place for myself, and I'm, proud of that. And I think if we can all find like something that we're really into and pursue it as a craft, and not be in too much of a hurry, and just have patience with things. And, training is one of those things, we all want to like be strong and send our project, but the best climbers are the ones that have been doing it a long time, and they're craftsmen, and so that's what I've learned. And that probably gets back to a lot of these interviews, and what I've learned from these people is, man, they're all craftsmen, whether they know it or not, whether that's in business or in climbing. And I just love that idea.
I'd love to ask with that. Is this blog, Clipping Chains, is this your craft that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I guess I'll admit that. I've tried to beat around the bush and pretend I don't care that much, but I really do, actually. I tried to pretend it was just a hobby, but now that I'm not working, I really do think this is my thing. I'm trying to, the craft is certainly writing. I think I do want to do something with writing one day that may be beyond just this website. So I try and write every day. And that's like a 7-day-a-week habit for me. And I do get a whole hell of a lot out of this, especially when I get kind of feedback, especially from climbers. Because that's, I've had articles kind of shared around the personal finance world, and that's great. But sometimes I feel like that's an echo chamber because I'm already talking to people who get that side of things. When I hear from another climber, even if it's one view out of 1,000, if that meant something for them, that really, really gets me excited because I'm all right, this is my people, and so I do think that is my craft now. I think I'm getting a lot out of this. I'm glad I don't have to make it a business because I don't want to, and it would be a terrible business and I wouldn't make any money with it. But I'm glad I can enjoy it for what it is and just a project. And yeah, some days are better than others, right? Some days I'm really frustrated. Maybe a post I thought people would really like is not getting shared around. Boo-hoo. I still learned something. I still am a better writer than I was a month ago, or a year ago probably. Maybe a month's not a long enough time frame to assess it. But oh yeah, I go back and look at some of my older articles, and I should just delete them. But I'll keep them for historical, posterity. But yeah, I mean. And you hear that a lot from people who are writers or, you had Tara Kersner on, filmmakers. I mean, she said, don't post my old videos because I don't like them. It's so true. Because you just get better. You get better and you hone a craft.
Well, Chad, I know you don't necessarily, you spoke to your own climbing in kind of a funny, self-deprecating way, and I totally hear what you're saying, but I'd love to hear about your climbing. This is a climbing podcast, and and you love it.
I knew you were going to eventually ask.
I think a lot of people can relate to it. So yeah, I'd love to hear, you guys did this recent trip to Sicily.
Yep.
And we were talking on the phone. It sounds like your kind of main thing that you're excited about is sport climbing. But yeah, I'd love to hear. Tell me a little bit about your own climbing.
Yeah, I'm your typical performance-oriented, obsessed climber. Who's not as good as he should be. But I've been climbing 10 years. Primarily a sport climber. I'd say I'm a part-time boulder, a part-time trad climber. Those have increased with varying frequencies over the years. But sport climbing is probably always my main squeeze.
Uh-huh.
I want to boulder more, honestly. The whole thing was that we were going to maybe do some traveling, and my wife's not much of a climber, so I was going to embrace bouldering more because it's way easier to do solo, and it doesn't take as much of the day.
Sure.
Yeah, because you can get in a good session in 3 or 4 hours. So.
Oh, sure.
So Front Range obviously is a really great place to kind of pursue everything. So it's easy to be kind of a sort of jack of all trades, but I think
I don't know if we said this, but you're in Denver.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I think I'm a terrible boulder. I'm a pretty, in terms of sport climbing, I would consider myself a pretty solid 5'12" climber. I would expect to do just about anything at those grades in a reasonable amount of tries, and I've done a couple of 5'13" minus, but I'd really like to solidify and get into the mid-13s and kind of bone up at that range. Man, I think bouldering is what holds me back because when I get to something I can't do, it's usually a crux and a series of moves that I just can't stick. It's not endurance. I know it's not endurance. I think it's me. It's it's body positioning and tension, these sort of things. I think those are my big weaknesses. I spent years getting damn strong fingers, and I think that paid dividends, but it's no longer a weakness for me. So I love getting into now I'm just become obsessed with movement, which I'm really thankful for in these times because I do have a home wall, because I'd be going crazy just doing pull-ups because I haven't climbed outside in 6+ weeks since mid-March, which has been hard, but So I thankfully have like the tiniest little home wall. It's like a 35-degree spray wall that I just decked. Luckily, I already had everything.
Oh, nice.
I had a home wall in Texas that when I moved to Colorado, my garage was like made for a Model T, and it's like tiny and crappy. And I thought actually might fall down if I put a wall on it. So I didn't do it. And I had a gym 10 minutes away. So I never really felt the need to. But when all the gyms closed and then I started getting the bad vibes about climbing outside, I was like, okay, we're putting that wall up. And so I did that immediately. And so I've just become obsessed with and it's actually been really beneficial. I'm trying to make the best of this time. I'm out there with like my camera filming everything. And again, it's like that concept of effort. Like I am trying to only do things that I hate. And it's really frustrating because I'm trying to only set problems that are everything I'm bad at, which is a lot. But so I got plenty of options. And so yeah, I've just been that's been my main focus for 6 weeks now. Is setting problems with just specific moves that just I don't hold tension in very well, or I sag in the hips or whatever, and just filming it, doing it again, watching it, doing it again. Neighbors walk by, look at me. Yeah, because
that's awesome.
All the neighbors are walking incessantly, and so they all walk by my garage and look at me like I'm weird, and I don't have a shirt on, and it's awkward.
I think I just said this on Mikey's episode, or I think we talked about this, but I think filming yourself and reviewing is one of the most powerful things that any climber can do in the climbing gym.
It is. I mean, and I used to do it a little bit, and then a couple years ago, I worked with Nate Drolet at Power Company, and he made me film everything for obvious reasons because he was a remote coach, and obviously it was fantastic to have his feedback. But when that ended, I was getting so much out of it, and I had learned to look for things from working from him that I just got in the habit of it, and it's still a little awkward in a public gym, sure. Especially when it's team night and there's 15-year-old girls running around. You got your camera perched in the corner, and you're like, "I'm not filming you, it's for me." And but it's way easier at home, and I can just freely set up a tripod, and because I don't want anyone, at a gym, people think you're gonna post it on Instagram and just spray about it, and I'm like, no, this really is. But I agree, it's it's a game changer for me because you don't even know what you're doing wrong till you watch it. I mean, I don't anyway. I just don't have that natural feel of. I think some people have that really good. What is it? Proprioceptive. What's the term I'm looking for?
Proprioceptive awareness, maybe.
Yeah, where they can really sense their body's kind of movement through space. Yeah. I think I'm pretty bad at that, honestly.
Okay, interesting.
So you film yourself and you're like, damn it, I don't look like Sharma. I thought I did.
I modeled his haircut. I bought all the Prana clothes, and I still don't look like him. Damn.
Nope, I know. So yeah, no, I think bouldering for me is if I can bone up in that category, I think I can kind of break through to the next level, and that'll be good. So
that's
hopefully
awesome.
When the world opens up, I got all these fresh new pads that are just sitting in my garage, falling on them there instead of outside, and hopefully we get to use them soon, man.
I love it. Where are you most excited to go climbing first when things open up?
Oh, that's a good question. Locally or just if I could go anywhere?
How about realistic? As soon as things open in your region and you can just pop out for an evening or something, where are you excited to go?
Oh, for an evening, man.
Or a weekend day, whatever.
Rifle season's coming up. That's always fun. I didn't go there a lot. Last season, but it's always a good place to get a great ego smashing.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my God. But no, I mean for bouldering, I'd love to take a trip out to. I'd like to go to the Northwest. Actually, I've never really climbed the Northwest. I'd love to check out Leavenworth and Squamish and those areas.
Do you know that Leavenworth is totally my stomping grounds?
Yeah, well, we talked about this because I saw you're on your area code, so I knew you.
Oh, right, okay, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've always, I lived in Portland for a year, but I didn't climb at the time, and I was kind of kicked myself because I've never been to Smith, I've never been to any of those places. So yeah, but for bouldering, I'd like to go check out that stuff, and I think I'd be pretty bad at it, so that'd be good, weird compression stuff. So I don't know. Awesome. I think that would be fantastic.
Any specific projects that you're thinking about during those home wall sessions when you're just training on moves that you suck at?
Oh man, well, there's a local crag nearby. It's not publicized, so I can't really say much about it. But
Okay.
it's certainly more known now. There's a lot of cool stuff up there I'd like to do. That's probably in sport climbing, in like the, I don't know, probably low to mid 13 range. I want to try.
Awesome.
Honestly, I had some like little mini, bite and chew kind of projects I was working on in March, like in the 12 plus range that were fun, but weren't like major projects, and got one of them done, had almost one done before the world closed down. So maybe I'll go and finish that stuff up. But honestly, I'm way less optimized in goal planning when it comes to climbing. I'm not really great at having like, okay, I'm going to do this project, which leads into this one for this major goal on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is actually a weakness of mine. I think I kind of, if anything, I may sometimes go too easy on myself, and I'm like, I don't really get out really uncomfortable on a big project. Like if I'm on something for like 3 to 5 days and like 20 some tries, like I'm starting to hate it.
Sure.
Like I'm not really great at like, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, I'm not sure. Like I don't go much beyond that. I usually try and do things in like 10 or so tries, kind of my sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a healthy project for me without like loathing it.
Yeah.
Doing the same warm-ups and all that stuff. But I think I don't know. I think I should probably try and throw in the occasional just like mega thing, or just to see what that level feels like. At least just get thrown around on it,
That resonates with me. I think that is the value in that. I think there's a time and a place for that, and maybe just to check in and maybe find some inspiration in that really hard thing. And there's different schools of thought on this, of course, but I'm kind of more with you, where I think spending most of our time doing things we can do in a pretty reasonable time frame and just always building that pyramid and building that base of experience, I think that's a really good investment of time.
Yeah, I'm really into that, and maybe too into it. I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, like what I was hoping to do with, having left my job, I was like, sweet, I'm going to like spend months just like climbing and having fun. And then like the whole world shut down like 3 weeks later.
Oh, I didn't realize the timing was...
Yeah, the timing was terrible. Like I left my job on February 7th.
Okay.
I went to Sicily the next day.
Okay.
We were in Sicily for 2 weeks. That was great. But then I came back and was like, oh, okay, I'm going to like enjoy this like unemployed, fun employed life. And it was like literally about 3 weeks. So it was like late February is when I got back, and then the last day of climb was March 18th. So, yeah, it was that quick. And so I was just hoping to I was going to experiment with just not going to the gym much, and just like, I've never just fully climbed outside. And I listened to your interview with Jonathan Ceuse, and he was like, man, I just had that killer year when I just climbed. And I was like, I've never done that.
Right.
I've never once spent like more than 50% outside of the gym.
Totally.
So I was just going to just maybe not go to the gym for a while and just see what happened with my climbing if I just actually climbed on rock more.
Yeah.
So that's your grand experience.
I know. Exactly. I was just thinking, I was like, that's exactly, man, that's hitting home right now.
Yeah. So I'm jealous.
That was exactly my plan. And here we are. So making the best of it.
There will come a time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm hoping to spend much of the fall in Rifle. So, if things open up.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah. Maybe I'll see you out there.
Have you climbed there before?
I have, just 2 really short trips, like 1 week each.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have a little bit more time to invest in that place. I really love it. As you said, it's a real giant slice of humble pie, which I'm all about. I love it.
I know, and because everyone there is way strong, and there's that crew of people who have everything dialed there that make you feel extra shitty. They're like, do you mind if I warm up on this? Like, go ahead.
There will always be those people.
For sure.
Well, so you've mentioned a couple times that you also love cooking, and I thought a fun question to ask.
Yeah.
I was looking through your blog, and I came across another fun article. It says, the title of the article is How to Make Food at Home That Doesn't Suck. And I just would love to ask, do you have a favorite thing to cook?
That was pre-coronavirus, too. Now you're going to really need it.
Yeah, totally.
Do I have a favorite thing to cook?
Or a new favorite thing that you've tried during this whole Corona thing, or anything that comes to mind?
Well, I was just in Italy, so you don't go to Italy and not get into Italian food. So like I came back and I probably only cooked Italian food for like 3 weeks after I got back because I just couldn't and I actually always do that wherever I travel to. I even went to Germany like 2 years ago and I was like making German food, and German food is not even that good. But I just, you get in this groove and you're like, you just want to like keep on riding it. So I just love simple things. Like if you just get a bell pepper, like a red bell pepper, and just char the shit out of it on your stove, that's a roasted red pepper. It's amazing. You can buy that in a jar for $8, or you can go buy the peppers and you can roast them. You put them in a Ziploc bag, let them get cold, strip all the charred stuff off, cut them up, put them in a Tupperware with olive oil and garlic, and that is amazing.
Oh, wow.
It's that simple.
Are you using any oil on the stove, or is it just directly
on the flame, right on the burner?
Okay.
Or if you got a grill outside. Like I love simple food. That's why I love like Italian, and I mean my training's pretty Eurocentric, but I love like simple food, like Mexican food. And a lot of these cuisines come out of like when people didn't have money and they didn't have many ingredients, so they would make something with 2 or 3 ingredients, and I love that stuff. So a lot of people think all this stuff's like fancy or gourmet. It's like, dude, all you're doing is sticking a bell pepper on an open flame until it gets black. Like, it's that simple. And then just add some olive oil and garlic and just let it sit. Those things will last for weeks, and they're really tasty. You can put them in salads, put them in anything. I mean, I just eat them raw, whatever. Awesome. I love little stuff like that. But in terms of, this time of year, we start doing a lot of grilling because it's warm out and it's nice. Let's see. I mean, my wife's big thing, and we're into it too, is just simple stews. Like, that's another time-saving trip when we get back to the real world and you got to, like, actually go to work and stuff, and you got to commute and you don't have time. Like, we like to cook in batch. So, we'll make a big batch of something. A lot of times it's just 3 or 4 ingredients, big stews in a pot, and we'll eat it for 4 or 5 nights. And so it's just really simple. You just reheat it every night, and it's just, vegetables, protein, just simple stuff. Just kind of all you need and nothing you don't. But one guilty pleasure...
I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yes. Since returning to Italy, I'm not going to make it. Yeah. I don't want to sound like I'm all good and no bad. I got bad things. So I'd never heard of this stuff, but in Italy, Lemoncello, it's a big thing. I'm probably bastardizing the pronunciation. It's just this sugary, it's basically just sugar water and vodka.
Okay.
It's infused with zest from a lemon, like lemon zest. Mm-hmm. And so I looked it up. We were drinking this stuff. And so what the Italians do is they drink it after a meal. It's like the digestive. Right? And so it's supposed to be for your digestion, but that's probably bullshit. But it tastes really good. It's just vodka with sugar. It can't be good. Uh-huh. But it tastes amazing. And so we were in this restaurant. We didn't eat out much in Italy, but we went to this one restaurant, and this guy's like, "Oh, we're going to give you this." He's like, "It's from the boss." And so he gave it to us for free. I think he was just trying to impress us or whatever. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is so good." And so I looked it up, and it's really easy to make. All you do is you take the zest of like 10 lemons. So you just like shave off the outer bit of the lemon. Uh-huh. And you can still use the interior of the lemon for other stuff. You take 10 lemons, take the zest, it's like a whole bottle of vodka, and you just let that sit for like 2 weeks or a week. And then you add like a simple syrup. It's just water and sugar boiled down. And then let that sit for another 2 weeks. And it's like this delicious little tasty treat that I got to admit, I've been having too many of them lately. We've been following up meals. But man, it's like a nice little, it's like a nice little finisher.
Sounds incredible.
So, yeah. It's been really nice. And it's really easy to do it yourself.
I love it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try to find a recipe to link to for people.
Yeah, especially now it's the summer. They're nice and cold. They're great.
What else are people going to do right now?
I know, right?
What about right, yeah. Be careful out there, people. What about fine dining? You've also mentioned that you love that, and that's kind of a passion of yours. Is there a restaurant or a specific meal that you are most looking forward to after the quarantine?
Oh, man. But fine dining, I do that maybe twice a year in terms of like going out. Like we'll do it for like our anniversary, or like we have like a combined birthday dinner because our birthdays are pretty close. Okay,
nice.
So we don't do that often. It's one of those things, again, I think if you put in the time, you can honestly recreate a lot of that stuff at home. I mean, not to take away from what those people do. I mean, not really. They do really great work. Man, is there like a meal? It's true. I haven't even gotten takeout in like 6 or 8 weeks. We've only cooked our own food this whole time. Man, I could just go for something really simple. Like, we have this wing place down the road. I keep walking by it, and it's driving me insane. And, and I was like, man, I'm going to have a salad that smells way better.
Just get some wings.
Honestly, yeah, I wouldn't mind just like getting some Mexican food or something. Like, I don't even care about fine dining right now. Like, I'm just craving just something I don't know. I think like in times like this, you want comfort food,
Right.
Like, everyone's a little stressed. And nothing like stress to make you want to eat like some Mexican or some wings. So, yeah, that's probably where I'd go. Just go get a burger or something.
What about books? So you've mentioned a couple throughout the course of this podcast. You mentioned James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. You also mentioned Cal Newport's book, and I'll be sure to link to those. Sounds like you read a lot, and you have a bunch of books that you recommend linked to your website. Is there a favorite or most impactful book from maybe the last year that stands out that you'd recommend for people?
Yeah, so I would say both those we already mentioned, I think, in terms of just nonfiction, just kind of like life optimization stuff. I would definitely recommend Atomic Habits, and I'd recommend, honestly, any of Cal Newport's books. He's got like 3 or 4 now on kind of these like career optimization or kind of meaningful work or productive time. He also did one that I wrote about called Digital Minimalism.
Oh, okay. That's been on my list.
Yeah, it's really good. You should read it. And it's kind of shocking. There's a lot of research into, too much time on phones and social media and what that's doing to us. And that's really interesting stuff. But I also, I don't try and just only read that stuff. I'm not like one of those only, that would make me left-brained or something if I only listened to and read about just nonfiction life optimization. I like that stuff, but I try and balance it. Like, I'm a huge David Sedaris fan.
Okay.
If you guys don't know him, he's a super sarcastic, witty kind of satirist writer. He writes a lot for like the New Yorker and the Atlantic. He's been on NPR a lot as a guest, but he's incredibly funny, and it's totally my sense of humor, like very sarcastic, and it's just observations of stuff in life and of his ridiculous family, and just ridiculous stories that he just sees. He takes a journal every day and he writes down just funny things he sees in the world. And he's just a great storyteller. So that stuff, like, very few things will actually make me like literally laugh out loud when I'm reading. Uh-huh. And David Sedaris is like a guaranteed laugh out loud kind of writer for me. So I would look into his stuff, Calypso, and what's the classic? Me Talk Pretty One Day.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah,
okay.
Check those out.
Great, I'll link to those.
And right now I'm reading The Stand, which is probably a bad idea. It's Stephen King's like mega epic novel about a virus that kills off everyone. And I was like, I read it like 10 or 15 years ago, and I didn't really remember much about it. And I remember liking it a lot. And I'm like, well, no better time than now in the middle of a virus to read about a virus. So that's like kind of guilty pleasure reading maybe. But
has it informed how you've navigated coronavirus at all?
Oh, no, not really. That one's way worse. Everyone dies. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. My wife's way more of a reader. She's a machine when it comes to books. I just read right before bed until I fall asleep. So I'm pretty slow. But she actually has like reading goals. Like she's into it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Reading goals.
Yeah. She's like, I want to read this many books in a year.
Oh, gotcha.
I just read until I fall asleep. So I'm not. Yeah.
Got it. I'm more like you.
Yeah.
What is something that you have been especially grateful for lately?
Oh man, my wife, especially now. I know it's an easy answer, but like we're quarantined, most of the world's quarantined. I couldn't imagine like looking side eye across the room at somebody I didn't want to be locked down with, whether that's a roommate or to be in a relationship that ain't solid. She's my best friend in the world. If I got to spend every day locked in the same house as somebody, there's no better person. And I mean it. So, like, I'm eternally grateful for her. Like, she puts up with all this crap. Like, she doesn't like me being on the internet. She doesn't, she's still a huge supporter of everything I do. And that means a lot. I'm really grateful for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Love it. Where can people find you?
The website's clippingchains.com. Oh, and actually, now that we're on a climbing podcast, I can finally explain the name because no one ever gets it. Especially in the personal finance world, they're like, what is this? You're like breaking the chains of bondage? You're like, well, sort of. It's like a double entendre. Is that only a sexual term, by the way? Double entendre? I don't know.
Let's roll with it.
But so obviously climbers get clipping chains, 'cause you're, clipping the chains of a route.
Right.
But it is about freeing yourself too. There's a lot of things we're held down by that we don't even know. So you kind of clip those little chains. And so yeah, I've been waiting for the moment. I've been thinking about explaining the name of this website for like 2 years.
You're like, it's clever. I want everyone to know how clever it is.
I was like, there's no way I can. I've tried to explain like clipping chains, the climbing thing, to people that don't climb. They're like, what? Like, okay.
Yeah, that is actually kind of weird.
It is.
That's not the most intuitive phrase.
They just think we climb mountains.
Right.
And there's no chains.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers that you have to kind of walk them through to get to clipping chains and have that make sense.
Exactly.
What's the best way for people to reach out? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry. No. I interrupted. I got off on this tangent. Yeah. So I'm at clippingchains.com. That's the website. I am on Instagram. I think it's the same name, Clipping Chains. I have a Twitter account, which climbers don't use, but everyone in personal finance does. So I interact with those kind of folks over there. I think it's Chains Clipping. Yeah, you can find me either way. And then
I'll link to it.
I have a contact page on the website. I am very active about responding to people because that's important to me. Some people ignore those sort of things. I don't. I will respond if you email me. And so that's probably the best way to get in touch with me is through the website. I honestly, for all the digital minimalism reasons we already discussed, I'm not on the social media as much as I probably should. But I try and minimize my time there. So the website's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, this has been a real pleasure. It was so fun to connect with you when you reached out. And, at first, I had read your article with Mike, of course, but it was really neat to get on the phone with you and hear what you had done, how you got interested in this financial independence thing and your own story, and to hear that you've really made it happen and it's freed you to pursue clipping chains and to do this thing that you love. And I have really enjoyed a number of your articles already, and I think that a lot of people will get a lot out of this. So I really appreciate your time, and it's been so fun to connect.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think, I think a lot of people can find something for them. And I think you said it best when it's a sliding scale and there's a lot of knobs. Like there is no one right life or one right answer to get there. So yeah, I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Anything that you'd like to share with people that we didn't get to?
Oh man, no. I think we covered it.
Okay.
I appreciate it. You're very thorough. That's why we talked. I told this guy, for everyone that listens, he does his homework, and you should all subscribe to his podcast because he's going places. Because no one does their homework like Steven. He's really thorough, and I appreciate that. So we covered everything.
Everything. Perfect. Well, I'll touch base with you soon, and we'll get some resources to point people to that'll help them out if people want to dig in further.
Yeah, and remind me if I don't send you that spreadsheet to go dig it up, because I'm pretty sure I've got one more or less ready to go.
Okay. Perfect.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Chad. Hopefully see you in Rifle.
All right, man. Well, stay cool in the van and drive safe.
I'll do my best.
Keep your distance, wash your hands, all that good stuff.
Thank you. Enjoy the home wall.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.
Move with the rhythm. Shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.